Autobiography of Benvenuto Cellini, Part 2, Section 11, Chapters 51 through 56. Chapter 51. After we had been one day in Italy, the Count Galetto della Mirandola joined us. He was traveling by post, and stopping where we were. He told me that I had done wrong to leave France. I ought not to journey forward, for if I returned at once, my affairs would be more prosperous than ever. On the other hand, if I persisted in my course, I was giving the game up to my enemies, and furnishing them with opportunities to do me mischief. By returning, I might put a stop to their intrigues, and those in whom I placed the most confidence were just the men who played most traitorously. He would not say more than that he knew very well all about it, and indeed the Cardinal of Ferrara had now conspired with the two rogues I left in charge of all my business. Having repeated over and over again that I ought absolutely to turn back, he went onward with the post, while I, being influenced by my companions, could not make my mind up to return. My heart was sorely torn asunder, at one moment by the desire to reach Florence as quickly as I could, and at another by the conviction that I ought to regain France. At last, in order to end the fever of this irresolution, I determined to take the post for Florence. I could not make arrangements with the first postmaster, but persisted in my purpose to travel forward and endure an anxious life at Florence. I parted company with Signor Ippolito Gangazza, who took the route for Mirandola, while I diverged upon the road to Parma and Pazienza. In the latter city I met Duke Pier Luigi upon the street, who stared me in the face and recognized me. Since I knew him to have been the sole cause of my imprisonment in the castle of St. Angelo, the sight of him made my blood boil. Yet being unable to escape from the man, I decided to pay him my respects, and arrived just after he had risen from table in the company of the Landi, who afterwards murdered him. On my appearance he received me with unbounded marks of esteem and affection, among which he took occasion to remark to the gentlemen present that I was the first artist of the world in my own line, and that I had been for a long while in prison at Rome. Then he turned to me and said, "My Benvenuto, I was deeply grieved by your misfortune, and knew well that you were innocent, but could not do anything to help you. In short, it was my father who chose to gratify some enemies of yours, from whom, moreover, he heard that you had spoken ill of him. I am convinced this was not true, and indeed I was heartily sorry for your troubles." These words he kept piling up and repeating until he seemed to be begging my pardon. Afterwards he inquired about the work I had been doing for his most Christian Majesty, and on my furnishing him with details, he listened as attentively and graciously as possible. Then he asked if I had a mind to serve him. To this I replied that my honor would not allow me to do so, but that if I had completed those extensive works begun for the king, I should be disposed to quit any great prince merely to enter his Excellency's service. Hereby it may be seen how the power and goodness of God never leave unpunished any sort or quality of men who act unjustly toward the innocent. This man did what was equivalent to begging my pardon in the presence of those very persons whom subsequently took revenge on him for me and many others whom he had massacred. Let then no prince, however great he be, laugh at God's justice in the way that many whom I know are doing, and who have cruelly maltreated me, as I shall relate at the proper time. I do not write these things in any worldly spirit of boasting, but only to return thanks to God, my deliverer, in so many trials. In those, too, which daily assail me, I always carry my complaint to him, and call on him to be my defender. On all occasions, after I have done my best to aid myself, if I lose courage, and my feeble forces fail, then is the great might of God manifested, which descends unexpectedly on those who wrongfully injure their neighbors, or neglect the grave and honorable charge they have received from him. Chapter 52. When I returned to my inn, I found that the Duke had sent me abundance to eat and drink of very excellent quality. I made a hearty meal, then mounted and rode toward Florence. There I found my sister with 6 daughters, the eldest of whom was marriageable, and the youngest still at nurse. Her husband, by reason of diverse circumstances in the city, had lost employment from his trade. I had sent gems and French jewelry more than a year earlier, to the amount of about 2,000 ducats, and now brought with me the same wares to the value of about 1,000 crowns. I discovered that, whereas I made them an allowance of 4 golden crowns a month, they always drew considerable sums from the current sale of these articles. My brother-in-law was such an honest fellow that, fearing to give me cause for anger, he had pawned nearly everything he possessed, and was devoured by interest, in his anxiety to leave my moneys untouched. It seems that my allowance, made by way of charity, did not suffice for the needs of the family. When then I found him so honest in his dealing, I felt inclined to raise his pension, and it was my intention, before leaving Florence, to make some arrangement for all of his daughters. Chapter 53. The Duke of Florence, at this time, which was the month of August, 1545, had retired to Poggio a Cajano, 10 miles distant from Florence. Thither, then, I went to pay him my respects, with the sole object of acting as duty required, first because I was a Florentine, and next because my forefathers had always been adherents of the Medicean party, and I yielded to none of them in affection for this Duke Cosimo. As I have said, then, I rode to Poggio with the sole object of paying my respects, and with no intention of accepting service under him, as God, who does all things well, did then appoint for me. When I was introduced, the Duke received me very kindly. Then he and the Duchess put questions concerning the works which I had executed for the king. I answered willingly and in detail. After listening to my story, he answered that he had heard as much, and that I spoke the truth. Then he assumed a tone of sympathy and added, "How small a recompense for such great and noble masterpieces! Friend Benvenuto, if you feel inclined to execute something for me too, I am ready to pay you far better than that king of yours has done, for whom your excellent nature prompts you to speak so gratefully." When I understood his drift, I described the deep obligations under which I lay to his Majesty, who first obtained my liberation from that iniquitous prison, and afterwards supplied me with the means of carrying out more admirable works than any artist of my quality had ever had the chance to do. While I was thus speaking, my lord the Duke writhed in his chair, and seemed as though he could not bear to hear me to the end. Then, when I had concluded, he rejoined, "If you are disposed to work for me, I will treat you in a way that will astonish you, provided the fruits of your labors give me satisfaction, of which I have no doubt." I, poor unhappy mortal, burning with desire to show the noble school of Florence that, after leaving her in youth, I had practiced other branches of the art than she imagined, gave answer to the Duke that I would willingly erect for him in marble or in bronze a mighty statue on his fine piazza. He replied that, for a first essay, he should like me to produce a Perseus. He had long set his heart on having such a monument, and he begged me to begin a model for the same. I very gladly set myself to the task, and in a few weeks I finished my model, which was about a cubit high, in yellow wax, and very delicately finished in all its details. I had made it with the most thorough study in art. The Duke returned to Florence, but several days passed before I had an opportunity of showing my model. It seemed, indeed, as though he had never set eyes on me or spoken to me, and this caused me to augur ill of my future dealings with His Excellency. Later on, however, one day after dinner, I took it to his wardrobe, where he came to inspect it with the Duchess and a few gentlemen of the court. No sooner had he seen it than he expressed much pleasure, and extolled it to the skies, wherefrom I gathered some hope that he might really be a connoisseur of art. After having well considered it for some time, always with greater satisfaction, he began as follows. If you could only execute this little model, Benvenuto, with the same perfection on a large scale, it would be the finest piece in the piazza. I replied, Most excellent, my lord. Upon the piazza are now standing works by the great Donatello and the incomparable Michelangelo, the two greatest men who have ever lived since the days of the ancients. But since your excellence encourages my model with such praise, I feel the heart to execute it at least thrice as well in bronze. No slight dispute arose upon this declaration, the Duke protesting that he understood these matters perfectly and was quite aware what could be done. I rejoined that my achievements would resolve his disputations and debates. I was absolutely sure of being able to perform far more than I had promised for His Excellency, but that he must give me means for carrying my work out, else I could not fulfill my undertaking. In return for this, His Excellency bade me formulate my demands in a petition detailing all my requirements. He would see them liberally attended to. It is certain that if I had been cunning enough to secure by contract all I wanted for my work, I should not have incurred the great troubles which came upon me through my own fault. But he showed the strongest desire to have the work done, and the most perfect willingness to arrange preliminaries. I, therefore, not discerning that he was more a merchant than a duke, dealt very frankly with His Excellency, just as if I had to do with a prince, and not with a commercial man. I sent in my petition, to which he replied in large and ample terms. The memorandum ran as follows. Most rare and excellent my patron, petitions of any validity and compacts between us of any value do not rest upon words or writings. The whole point is that I should succeed in my work according to my promise, and if I so succeed, I feel convicted that your most illustrious Excellency will very well remember what you have engaged to do for me. This language so charmed the Duke, both with my ways of acting and of speaking, that he and the Duchess began to treat me with extraordinary marks of favor. Chapter 54. Being now inflamed with a great desire to begin working, I told His Excellency that I had need of a house where I could install myself and erect furnaces, in order to commence operation in clay and bronze, and also according to their separate requirements in gold and silver. I knew that he was well aware how thoroughly I could serve him in those several branches, and I required some dwelling fitted for my business. In order that His Excellency might perceive how earnestly I wished to work for him, I had already chosen a convenient house in a quarter much to my liking. As I did not want to trench upon His Excellency for money or anything of that sort, I had brought with me from France 2 jewels, with which I begged him to purchase me the house, and to keep them until I earned it with my labor. These jewels were excellently executed by my workmen after my own designs. When he had inspected them with minute attention, he uttered these spirited words, which clothed my soul with a false hope. "Take back your jewels, Benvenuto. I want you and not them. You shall have your house free of charges." After this he signed a rescript underneath the petition I had drawn up, and which I have always preserved among my papers. The rescript ran as follows. "Let the house be seen to, and who is the vendor, and at what price, for we wish to comply with Benvenuto's request." I naturally thought that this would secure me in possession of the house, being over and above convinced that my performances must far exceed what I promised. His Excellency committed the execution of these orders to his major-domo, who was named Ser Pier Francesco Riccocchio. The man came from Prato and had been the Duke's pedagogue. I talked then to this donkey and described my requirements, for there was a garden adjoining the house on which I wanted to erect a workshop. He handed the matter over to a paymaster, dry and meagre, who bore the name of Lattanzio Gorini. This flimsy little fellow, with his tiny spider's hands and small gnat's voice, moved about the business at a snail's pace. Yet in an evil hour he sent me stones, sand, and lime enough to build perhaps a pigeon house with careful management. When I saw how coldly things were going forward, I began to feel dismayed. However, I said to myself, little beginnings sometimes have great endings, and I fostered hope in my heart by noticing how many thousand ducats had recently been squandered upon ugly pieces of bad sculpture turned out by that beast of a Boccaccio Bandinelli. So I rallied my spirits and kept prodding Lattanzio Guarini to make him go a little faster. It was like shouting to a pack of lame donkeys with a blind dwarf for their driver. Under these difficulties, and by the use of my own money, I had soon marked out the foundations of the workshop and cleared the ground of trees and vines, laboring on, according to my wont, with fire and perhaps a trifle impatience. On the other side, I was in the hands of Tasso the carpenter, a great friend of mine, who had received my instructions for making a wooden framework to set up the Perseus. This Tasso was a most excellent craftsman, the best, I believe, who ever lived in his own branch of art. Personally, he was gay and merry by temperament, and whenever I went to see him, he met me laughing, with some little song in falsetto on his lips. Half in despair, as I then was, news coming that my affairs in France were going worse, and these in Florence promising but ill through the lukewarmness of my patron, I could never stop listening till half the song was finished, and so in the end I used to cheer up a little with my friend, and drove away as well as I was able some of the gloomy thoughts which weighed upon me. Chapter 55. I had got all the above-mentioned things in order, and was making vigorous preparations for my great undertaking. Indeed, a portion of the lime had already been used, when I received sudden notice to appear before the major domo. I found him after His Excellency's dinner in the hall of the clock. On entering, I paid him marked respect, and he received me with the greatest stiffness. Then he asked who had installed me in the house, and by whose authority I had begun to build there, saying he marveled much that I had been so headstrong and foolhardy. I answered that I had been installed in the house by His Excellency, and that his lordship himself, in the name of His Excellency, had given the orders to Lattanzio Guarini. Lattanzio brought stone, sand, and lime, and provided me what I wanted, saying he did so at your lordship's desires. When I had thus spoken, the brute turned upon me with still greater tartness, vowing that neither I nor any of those whom I had mentioned spoke the truth. This stung me to the quick, and I exclaimed, "O major domo, so long as your lordship chooses to use language benefiting the high office which you hold, I shall revere you, and speak to you as respectfully as I do the Duke. If you take another line with me, I shall address you as but one Sir Pier Francisco Ricocchio." He flew into such a rage that I thought he meant to go mad upon the spot, anticipating the time ordered by heaven for him to do so. Pouring forth a torrent of abuse, he roared out that he was surprised at himself for having let me speak at all to a man of his quality. Thereupon my blood was up, and I cried, "Mark my words, then, Sir Pier Francesco Ricocchio. I tell you what sort of men are my equals, and who are yours, mere teachers of the alphabet to children." His face contracted with a spasm, while he raised his voice and repeated the same words in a still more insulting tone. I, too, assumed an air of menace, and matching his own arrogance with something of the same sort, I told him plainly that men of my kind were worthy to converse with popes and emperors and great kings, and that perhaps there were not 2 such men alive upon this earth, while 10 of his sort might be men at every doorway. On hearing these words, he jumped upon a window-seat in the hall there, and defied me to repeat what I had said. I did so with still greater heat and spirit, adding, I had no further mind to serve the Duke, and that I should return to France, where I was always welcome. The brute remained there stupefied and pale as clay. I went off furious, resolved on leaving Florence, and would to God that I had done so. The Duke cannot, I think, have been informed at once of this diabolical scene, for I waited several days without hearing from him. Giving up all thoughts of Florence, except what concerned the settlement of my sister and niece's affairs, I made preparations to provide for them as well as I could with the small amount of money I had brought, and then to return to France and never set my foot in Italy again. This being my firm purpose, I had no intention to ask leave of the Duke or anybody, but to decamp as quickly as I could, when one morning the major domo, of his own accord, and open a long pedantic oration, in which I could discover neither method, nor elegance, nor meaning, nor head, nor tail. I only gathered from it that he professed himself a good Christian, wished to bear no man malice, and asked me in the Duke's name what salary I should be willing to accept. Hearing this, I stood a while on guard and made no answer, being firmly resolved not to engage myself. When he saw that I refused to reply, he had at least the cleverness to put in, "Benvenuto, dukes expect to be answered, and what I am saying to you, I am saying from His Excellency's lips." Then I rejoined that if the message came from His Excellency, I would gladly reply, and told him to report to the Duke that I could not accept a position inferior to that of anyone employed by him as an artist. The major domo answered, "Bandolino receives 200 crowns a year. If, then, you are contented with that, your salary is settled." I agreed upon these terms, adding that what I might earn in addition by the merit of my performances could be given after they were seen. That point I left entirely to the good judgment of His Excellency. Thus, then, against my will, I pieced the broken thread again and set to work, the Duke continually treating me with the highest imaginable marks of favor. Chapter 56. I received frequent letters from France written by my most faithful friend, Messer Guido Guidi. As yet they told nothing but good news, and Ascanio also bade me enjoy myself without uneasiness, since, if anything happened, he would let me know at once. Now the king was informed that I had commenced working for the Duke of Florence, and being the best man in the world, he often asked, "Why does not Benvenuto come back to us?" He put searching questions on the subject to my 2 workmen, both of whom replied that I kept writing I was well off where I was, adding they thought I did not want to re-enter the service of His Majesty. Incensed by these presumptuous words, which were none of my saying, the king exclaimed, "Since he left us without any cause, I will not recall him. Let him even stay where he is." Thus the thievish brigands brought matters exactly to the pass they desired, for if I had returned to France, they would have become mere workmen under me once more, whereas, while I remained away, they were their own masters and in my place. Consequently, they did everything in their power to prevent my coming back. End of section 11.